Good morning, everyone. I'm going to start with the liberalization of Indian economy in 1991, and the book is NCRT Class 11 Economics. So let's have some background. तो हुआ ये था that during 1991 we were left with only 15 days of foreign exchange reserve, forex, and since we needed this precious forex for multiple reasons, and all the reasons have already been explained in the previous chapters, I'll give you a gist of it. So first such reason that the Indian sector they were developing, so they needed many commodities, some finished one, some intermediates one. They needed tools and machineries, and all those tools and machinery which could not be produced in India, they were imported. Then second, import of petrol and diesel, which was necessary to run the country. Third, repayments, वो इसलिए because the British they left us in a pauperized condition, near shattered condition, and somehow by will and by human ingenuity of nationalist leaders at that time, from 1952 to 1991, we rose like a phoenix. But this phoenix, it needed to be fed. So the revenue which could not be generated from internal resources, it had to be borrowed from outside, from external resources, such as the same money could be borrowed from uh, other sovereign nations or the international financial institutions. And the international financial institution in topic were World Bank and IMF. So we kept borrowing from such financial institution, and those borrowing they also had to be repaid in both premium and the interest. So all these activity together they kept eating away the precious forex, because foreign exchange reserve is the only mean by which any sovereign country or any country can transact internationally at global level. And if this level it drops to very low level, then the problem they can be multifaceted. First, ये पैसा चुकाना तो है ही है. First, the repayment obligations are there, and second, it questions the sovereignty that you are not balancing, you are not maintaining the finances in a proper way. And third, interference. If the foreign exchange reserve it is at very low level, then it obliges our country to interfere in our affairs, interfere in one country's internal affair, and this may be this may take some form of imperialism. So all in all, this was a serious situation, and to to correct the mistakes, we borrowed from World Bank and financial where and those financial institutions provided us 7 billion US dollar. But this time the $7 billion it did not came alone. With it came some conditions, and those conditions were to make changes in the way our economy were doing. And all those changes they are known as the 1991 reform, and in short they were known by LPG, liberalization, privatization, and globalization. And first we will be talking about liberalization. Then some of you may ask why was there need of so much money? So background is in 1952 our halat was very poor. The 75 to 90% of population it was employed in agriculture, guised or disguised way. Then the private sector it was near infancy, it was in budding stage. Then development of development itself, which include first infrastructure and then the welfare policies. And both of them they needed resources. And iska background I have given in the previous lecture, but let's talk about it again. So internal resources they could not be generated from this this population. When 75 to 95% of population it is employed in such an employment or such an occupation which is not remunerative, and the growth of agriculture it also stalled somewhere around 3%. Then the private sector itself, you may rely on corporate taxes, but private sector they themselves they are still going up. So all in all, we could resort to one thing, that was the state control, which was necessary. And people of that time they also had faith in the nationalist leader who had helped them through the yoke of colonialism. So state control was there, which was a condition of near monopoly, but it was not a dictatorship. It was not a dictatorship at all. It was just that because of need of that time, necessity of that time, state control was necessary. And state control here means the state was the only authority at that time who could channelize those resources, both internal and external, into the required sectors. And it did so with the help of 5-year plans. And those 5-year plan, they um, they have generated returns. They have come out as a beneficiary, but most of the projects they were of long gestation. Long gestation means जैसे डैम डैम हो गया है ना, सम इंडस्ट्रीज हो गई, कंस्ट्रक्शन हो गया. अब these activities first they take time to be fully manifested, such as the construction of dam it will take time, then it will take time in its functioning, in its proper running. And the same way, all other infrastructure such as road, railway, schools, hospitals, and welfare policies such as policies that eradicate poverty and unemployment, all those projects that needed constant supply of money without giving immediate returns. So state at that time, it had to overspend its capacity. It had to overspend because the situation of our country at that time could not allow frugal or a prudent living or frugal financial management. Because if we had thought about being frugal means to uh, to keep income and expenditure in tandem. और उस वक्त this was not possible. So financial propriety could not become buzzword of that time for the same particular reason, because all such economic activity, all such activities where state resources was being spent, they were of long gestation and they were also socio-economic in nature. For all that reason, we could not think about holding our hand. So, all in all, the state overspent its capacity. The forex it got depleted, and then we came face to face with a crisis, a balance of payment crisis, for which we had to make changes in the economy. So, as I have said, the state monopoly was there, state control was there, and for which state it started with many rules and regulation which were aimed to regulate the economic activity, but later on such activities they became hindrances in growth and development. So the hindrances here or the obstacle here was the license permit Raj, which was there to regulate the economic activities of or economic enterprises of private professionals, but later on it was exploited and corruption भी था. Then there was a mechanism of protection of domestic industries by tariff and quota, which was also led to inefficiencies. So such rigidities, especially in terms of rules and regulation, those rigidities they became solidified. So instead of serving their actual purpose, they started interfering with the growth momentum. So the first condition by liberalization it was to put an end to all these restrictions and open up various sectors of economy. And if you can recall, during that time, before 1991, state control was there. State was controlling the commanding heights of economy. It means state was regulating and operating maximum sector which it could. Then there was some industry that were reserved for private, for which it needed to have a license, both for expansion and for capacity generation. And then there were some cottage industries that were reserved for these small industries. So all in all, the restrictions of which, especially in terms of the private expansion and the competition of the cottage industry, both of them, they needed to be done away with. And it was not that all such um, newer reforms were introduced in 1991 itself. There were some reforms, there were some measures that were introduced in 1980 in areas of industrial licensing, export import policy and fiscal policy, technological upgradation, but the reforms of 1991 they were more comprehensive. So first such reform it was deregulation of industrial sector. So deregulation of industrial sector it means the industrial sector uh, it should be freed from the clutches of the state authority. So why was there a need to free it from state clutches? Because there were many regulatory mechanisms they were suffocating the growth of industrial sector, and those suffocation they were enforced in ways such as first industrial licensing under which every entrepreneur had to get permission from a government to start a firm. That was the license permit or license raj. So they needed license for starting a firm, for closing a firm, for expanding, for expansion or capacity development. Then private sector it was not allowed in many industries because of state control many economic activities. Then some goods could be produced only in small scale industries, which means some goods they were reserved for cottage industries. And then control on price fixation and distribution of selected industrial products. It was the domestic protection of domestic industries. So these four were the mechanism or the four were the suffocating mechanism that were hindering the growth of economy. Then the 1991 reform it removed many of these restrictions. Industrial licensing it was abolished for all categories. excluding a few such as alcohol, cigarettes, hazardous chemicals, industrial explosive, electronics, aerospace, drugs, and pharmaceuticals. So these sectors they were still reserved. Other than that, all such industrial activities or the need for industrial licensing it was abolished. Then the only industries which were now reserved for the public sector or the state, it was it were the defense equipments, atomic energy generation, and railway transport. Other than that, all the sector they were open to private individuals or private entrepreneurs. Then many goods that had been reserved for small scale industries in terms of cottage industry, they were de-reserved. Now any firm, big or small, can produce those goods that were reserved for those small scale industries. Now let's have a look at the second set of reforms, the financial sector reforms. So first, financial sector it includes financial institutions such as commercial banks, investment banks, and stock exchanges, including the forex market. So the financial sector it is controlled by Reserve Bank of India, and Reserve Bank of India it controls all these financial institutions via various norms and regulation. It is the RBI that decides the amount of money that bank can keep with themselves. It fixes interest rate, it fixes the nature of lending of various sectors. One of the major aim of financial sector reform it is to reduce the role of RBI from regulator to facilitator of financial sector, because you can see here these norms and regulation they put a lot of restriction on individual bank, commercial banks, small and big banks about their expansion, about their economic activities, about the nature of lending themselves. So we can say yes, financial sector, some regulations need to be there, because uh, all banks they could not be allowed to lend to the person of their choice or to the group or industry of their choice, and they also needed to work in remote area or in poor rural areas. So some regulations were there, but before 1991, the Reserve Bank of India, it the regulations of which it acted as speed breaker. Look, bank expansion, bank ka work, it is okay. Banking, the whole, if you can encapsulate all these financial activity in terms of banking, so it is necessary. Banking necessary because banking say first thing lending. जितने भी entrepreneurs हैं, इंडस्ट्रियल हाउसेज हैं, स्मॉल एंड बिग इंडस्ट्रीज हैं, उन सबको पैसा चाहिए. हर एक के पास पैसा नहीं होता. दे नीड इट फ्रॉम बैंक्स. But if RBI is regulating how much money you can lend to a particular entrepreneur or particular industry, which also take a form of quota. Second, branch expansion. अब इसमें भी ये एक एक पर्टिकुलर बैंक का डिस्क्रिशन होना चाहिए with some certain caveats or certain conditions. Like if they are expanding 100 branches, at least they can channelize those 10 branches in remote and poor areas. But अगर the regulations they tell bank to do this and that, then the whole zeal of entrepreneurship it is gone. It is the innovation, the finding the niches, the finding new areas, the pioneer technology, the adoption of newer upgradation that are the core facets of entrepreneurship. And if there is some regulator above those entrepreneurs who's telling them to expand their branches, 100 में से 50 branches will be in poor areas. So the whole profit dynamic is gone. उनको पता है कि the poor people, even if they respect them, the poor people are not going to run the whole banks because they will not have the savings. If they are not giving the savings, then how will the banks, they will have some money at their own, in their own coffers, which could be lent at a different set of interest rate. And यहाँ भी, if RBI is regulating the money that bank can keep with themselves, for example, if they are having 10 crores of saving, now Reserve Bank, it want them to keep 1 crore, that is about 10%, 10% of money to be reserved, which could be used in time of exigencies or used in times of necessity or for whatever reason. So this condition is unfair. To keep 10% and then they have 90% of amount, which is 9 crore. Out of 9 crore, they need to spend some money on operational expenses, which is by the running of bank branches, the the salaries, and also the expenses. Then out of it, whatever remains, jitna bachega, it is that money, maybe around 4 crore, which they can lend. And now lending, maybe RBI, it keeps its stick over them. It maintains its watch over them and decides the rate at which they can lend. So everything is decided by the IRBA itself. So how are they going to generate profit, or how are they going to run the whole business, whole the private business? So all in all, these financial reform, they were intended to reduce the role of RBI from strict regulator to facilitator. So the reform policies led to the establishment of private sector banks. Earlier, private sector banks were not there, and even if some were there, they all of them were nationalized, or most of them were nationalized during the time. Now, private sector, they have been given permission, avenue to, to establish and expand their branches, and foreign investment limit in banks were also raised to around 50%. So foreign investment, it is the money that all banks need for their capacity enhancement. So as I've said, बैंक का main profit जो होता है, it comes from lending, and lending के लिए जो money है, it comes from first domestic saving, then investment. So we are talking about the India of 1991. So even in 1991, the financial situation of Indians, it could be said as moderate. कुछ हो रहा था. Yes, we were developing. Some money was pouring in, some money was coming, and out of which there were booms and brackets in many spares. People had some money in their pockets, and out of that money, some was saved. So this money in itself, it could not be resorted to lending, because saving money को lending में convert करने के लिए they need to have a strong supportive chest, and that strong supportive chest is known as reserve. So banks, they need to keep some money in reserves. Private and public sector banks still are regulated by RBI on this front, that they need to reserve some money, because saving money, it is volatile. किस टाइम लोगों को जरूरत पड़ सकती है ना? They can take it out, they can withdraw money for many reasons. So because of volatility of this money, Banks, they need investment. Uh, Investment, it can take the form of both domestic and foreign investment. For domestic investment itself, if we are talking about a country that is moderate in its income generation, moderate in revenue generation, so moderate country, तो investment भी moderate होगा. Then our only escape or only chance, it is the foreign investment. अब 1991 से पहले foreign investment की limit, it was very less, which means that बैंक के पास जितना पैसा है, 1991 से पहले की बात कर रहा हूँ, so बैंक के पास जितना पैसा है, out of which only 20 to 30% could be of foreign origin. So it means uh, their lending activity, it could be saved by, or it could be influenced by the foreign sources only up to 30% margin. But after 1991 financial reforms, this investment limit, it was raised to 50%, which means now the coffers of bank, the money of bank, it could be 50% from foreign origins. Now, those banks which fulfill certain conditions, they were given freedom to set up new branches without approval of RBI. Another reform, this one is first one, this is second. And then the, the rigidity has been done away with, but still RBI, it held some power in, in order to safeguard the interests of account holders and the nation. So foreign institutional investors such as merchant bankers, mutual fund and pension fund, they are allowed to invest in Indian financial market, and the safeguarding powers of RBI, such as the enhancement of or the maintenance of reserve ratios, all kind of reserve ratios, CRR, SLR, cash reserve ratio, statutory statutory liquidity ratio, all such, those power are still kept by RBI to in the interest of nation. Then let's talk about the third set of reform, that is tax reform. So the policies that entertain both the income and expenditure, which means the taxation and public expenditure of government, they are collectively known as fiscal policy. And as we have seen, there are two kinds of taxes, direct and indirect. Direct taxes, they consist on taxes of income of individual as well as corporate taxes or the profits of business enterprises. Then since 1991, the tax rates on individual, it has been reduced so that instances of tax evasion, they could be eliminated, since it was felt that higher tax rate की वजह से individual taxpayer, they are evading taxes, they are not paying taxes, or they are manipulating the account. So the higher tax rate, it was lower down, it was reduced, and it was widely accepted that moderate rates of income tax, it encouraged savings and voluntary disclosure of income. And the rate of corporation tax, which was very high earlier, it has been gradually reduced. Then efforts have also been made to reform the indirect taxes, the taxes which are levied on commodities, which is another such simplification.